the conflict is not about how much fault you are. It's about how can we stop and re-engage and fix the problem.
If money can solve a problem, it's not a problem.
When emotions come across, which is most of the time when you're upset, it's hard.
Welcome back. The topic today is the art of peacemaking. So today, welcome Kylie, Cielo, Grant, and Nick. So today, we're going to try to resolve the issues we had in the last episode. Hopefully, we can achieve that goal. But before we get into that, I want to kind of give a visual of relationship. As we mentioned, relationship is about two or more people. Let's assume two people here. So they are two people who are in love or who are friends or co-workers who have a bond together. When they work in harmony, they tend to come closer to each other. So that bond is more pliable, it's unbreakable. During time of conflict, they move apart, away from each other, and these bonds tend to tense up. Now, the way to fix this is conflict resolution and coming up with a mutually agreeable solution and then bring them back close together. What tends to happen is, well, one of the situations is they resolve the situation and go back to their baseline, or when this happens, one individual trying to resolve the situation, the other person keeps pulling away, and that doesn't change. That bond keeps stretching until it breaks. Or both parties are stubborn, they're not talking, and they keep pushing until voila, it breaks. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to hurt my guest here, but that's what you see. So that's just a simple demonstration of what conflict and relationship, how they interact. Now that we've done that little demonstration, we're going to dive into specifics. You guys have friends. Your family is co-workers. When you have a conflict with your coworker or a friend of yours, one of the things you say or people say is, it's her fault. It did me wrong, or she did me wrong. Do you ever hear that?
All the time.
So what's wrong with that? Anyone wants to take that?
I mean, it could be both people.
Could be. Good. What do you think?
I think it is human to try to blame everything on somebody else, but at the end of the day, when there is conflict, it takes two people. Like they say, it takes two to tango. There is always a part, like if I have a conflict with you, there is your part and there is my part. And I might blame it on you because it probably makes me feel better, or I think that my part is not as big as yours, but I have a part. So I think that in order to fix the problem, you have to admit what your part of the problem is, and then you can try at least to fix that one, and you end up controlling what you can control, because at the end of the day, when I have conflict with somebody else, I can only control my part on it. The other part, I can react to it and make the conflict worse, but I cannot really control what that other part does.
Thank you, Cielo. You guys,
I think that's beautiful, and as much as we get into that, oftentimes, as a word I've brought up throughout the last podcast and this one is empathy. And as much as we try to be empathetic and get into the other person's shoes, sometimes we get caught up in what's going on with us. Like, how are you serving me, helping me, making me feel better? And, it's very important that that's brought up and considered all the time in the conflict resolution. So.
I think in any relationship, regardless if it's a friendship, work relationship, or romantic relationship, there needs to be some sense of selfishness and selflessness. There needs to be a sense of selfishness because you know what, there are some things I should be getting out of a relationship, like your respect, your time, you know, your care, or for example, if it's a work relationship, your investment in me was towards my career is going. There should also be a sense of selflessness, like what am I giving to the table? If it's a work relationship, am I turning in my job on time? Am I showing up to work? You know, am I putting in the extra hours? A romantic relationship is, am I hearing this person? Am I really putting them myself in their shoes to really understand what my part in this is? But you could also be a little selfish sometimes, be like, but that really hurt me, and that's okay. You know, relationship isn't going to be perfect. So I think it just comes to finding a balance and finding a sense of harmony of how selfish and how selfless you need to be at a very specific point in time in conflict resolution situations.
Yeah. Those are great points. And I think to summarize it, you know, you put it very well. It takes two to tango, you know, tango dance, because, you know, I think we are in, you know, if somebody is at 90% fault and the other person at 10% fault, the person at 10% tend to say, I didn't do anything wrong, that person did something wrong. It doesn't matter, because to resolve the conflict, it's not about how much fault you are. It's about how can we stop and re-engage and fix the problem. And I think that's where most people struggle with. You know, and then they go, you, rather than, well, I did this. For example, if someone walks up to you or call you up and say, hey, Grant, do you mind if I borrow $10,000? And deep down, you know that individual may not be able to pay you. You give them that $10,000. 2 months down the road, they're supposed to return you $10,000. They go, well, I don't have it. And they go, well, I need that to pay something. So, well, I don't have it. I don't know why. I don't. And an argument begins. Now you say, well, they are 100% at fault. No, they're not. That 1% that you knew they were not going to pay you, you let them have it. So therefore, you have a role to play in that conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes what we forget. We always thinking that it's got to be one way. No. You know, once you understand it's both, and then you have to fix your part in this equation. Because if you don't fix that, you blame them. Next time, Jane is gonna call you and say, "Do you have $5,000?" You're gonna do the same thing. But if you learn that you're weak at giving things to people who can afford to pay you back, fix that problem by yourself. The next time somebody comes and asks for $2, you don't give it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is where people keep repeating the same mistake over and over again, because they're not fixing self.
Conflict resolution. I will always go back to conflict resolution starts with the person that is in the conflict. It starts with you. Figure out what's wrong with you. If it's a big deal, it's probably something that's going on with you. Little things are, you fix it, money can do. My dad told me when I was a little kid, if money can solve a problem, it's not a problem.
It's true.
Right?
Yep.
So then any other problem, you need to start looking at what is going on with me right now. Why am I not happy? What am I not doing? How am I not fulfilling my soul so that I can be beneficial to other people? That's where you have to start.
Yep.
We can try to dodge it and we can try to pretend it's other things and other circumstances and things aren't going well, blah, blah, blah. But it starts deep down. Like, let me figure out and relieve my soul first. Once I do that, then I can start to help other people.
I think people are afraid to look inside, and like you said, it's easy to do this than to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So once you learn to do this and fix you, or fix me rather, then you will do less of this. If you can control you, that other person will start to change, because they realize, wait a minute, why am I fighting myself? That individual is cleaning up their mess.
Mm-hmm.
I need to fix my mess too. And I think that's something that we just, I don't think we do a lot of that.
Mhm.
So hopefully we can use that in our daily lives. Now, all right, Nick, can you describe a conflict that happened in your relationship and how you resolved it?
Conflict that happened in my relationship. Oh, like I said in the previous episode, I wasn't posting her enough on social media, so I just deleted social media. No, I'm kidding.
No, that's great.
Yeah. No, I mean, we run into issues where she doesn't really feel heard as much as she'd like to at times, and I don't really feel understood as much as I'd like to at times. Because I feel like our biggest issue in our relationship is not only hearing what we have to say, but really understanding what we have to say. There's a big miscommunication in that realm. The emotions can be calm, the pain can be, pretty much settled, we have a band-aid on the wound, whatever. But did we understand what caused that wound? Do we really know how we got to this point? That's really where we struggled. So what we have found is, like you mentioned in the previous episode, checking in on each other. That's what we do. We do it on a monthly basis. We either go get dinner, have those uncomfortable conversations that is only going to make our bond stronger. And, just really go from there, even if it does take 2, 3, 4 hours, or if it's a conversation we have to revisit later. Those are conversations that needs to be had. We're two people who have a common goal of making this relationship, prosper and move forward and grow together. We can only do that if we really work together.
It's interesting you mentioned the word miscommunication. A lot of people in a relationship will say, miscommunication. It's actually not that. The phrase is more ineffective communication. Because if you communicate effectively, you understand each other. And that comes to where, you're not listening to each other. And so we all do it. We say, oh, you don't understand, it's because we're not communicating effectively. And I think that if we communicate effectively, we'll understand each other. If you listen, that's the first thing. If you listen, we understand what the other person is saying, then we can try to be empathetic, like you said, and then they can listen to you and see where you're coming from. Then the communication really goes through.
Right. But again, what is effective communication? That starts with, we had to have set boundaries. We've talked to each other. We understand each other. We know what our quote unquote love language is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is effective communication? So that you can get to that person, and that, especially in that conflict resolution time, whenever there's some tension, you know exactly what to do because you've communicated beforehand how to release that tension. Right? I think it keeps coming back to the communication beforehand in order to release the tension.
It's kind of interesting that when you are dating someone, there's no script. When you get married, there's no script, no instructions. However, if you want to drive, you have to take a lesson, a test, pass that test, take a driving test, pass that test before you can get a license to drive. Mm-hmm. Yet in relationship, you don't have that testing ground. You don't have certificate of approval before you can get into a relationship. And then that's why we struggle a lot. And there is no class where you go to teach you how to engage in a relationship. And a lot of things that should have been done before we start a relationship, like you said, is happening during and causing a revolution, as we say. Mm-hmm. And so that's not helping.
No, we're trying to keep up.
It's trying to keep up. It's like, like a little rat on the wheels, just spinning. So, talk to us about a conflict in your relationship or in your life. It could be a friendship, could be work, could be boyfriend, could be anything.
I mean, I've had conflicts with friends before, and I feel like if I was younger, I probably would have just let it go and said nothing and ignored the whole thing. But as I get older, like what we've all talked about, I try and look at what I potentially did in that situation. I apologize for it. And then now it's on you. Do you want to apologize? Do you want to move forward as friends? How do you want to handle and resolve this conflict? And that's kind of the same thing we do in the relationship as well. And in the relationship, when we first started dating, we had a lot of hard conversations in the very beginning. So it was like, these are all the things we're going to come into in the next 6 months to a year of dating. Let's just talk about it now. Get it out of the way.
Great. Cielo, anything you want to add? Okay. Now, we talk about how to resolve conflict. In the process of resolving the conflict, this is trying to, a peacemaking process, so to speak. Do you attempt to define the source of the conflict? Are you trying to seek out what is causing the conflict?
Oftentimes, if I'm in a conflict, it has usually gotten to the point that I don't know what the source of the conflict was. Right? Like, if it's gotten to the point that it's conflict, both of us have kind of lost our way, we've forgotten our boundaries, and we're almost arguing about something that we're just arguing to argue at a certain point, and we've forgotten, like, why are we here? What was the boundary? What was overstepped? What was the problem? Not all these little things that keep building up on top of it that you'll argue about.
Yeah.
Right? And forget what the original argument was about.
Yeah.
What was the original? So it's one of my goals, and it's one of my, I'll even say 2024 resolutions. It's like, take a step back, see what is the original conflict in any situation, and then address that. Don't address the derivative conflicts.
Correct.
Right?
And I think that's what most people do. Most people, kind of deal with the superficial issue or the argument that ensues after the original problem, rather than understanding what is the underlying issue. So it could be that your partner is just frustrated because every time you come home, you don't help around the house. And it's been building up, and one day you came home, you just had dinner, you leave all the dishes in the sink, and you just walk away. And they just blow up and say, how dare you leave the dishes in there? And you start and go, why are you arguing with me over a dish in the kitchen? And you just, but she's not saying to you, listen, you haven't been helping me every time you come. I'm frustrated because that conversation was never discussed before.
Yeah.
And so now it's built up, and now she just exploded. And now you're going, I didn't do anything wrong. And you get mad for her getting up, so it turns to this stuff. And you guys never really address it. And then guess what? A week down the road, it happens again. Because you never actually sat down and go, so what really, what did I do? Why I know I should have washed the dishes. Is there anything else? And I said, well, you come when you don't always do it like that. And I think you're right. Again, when you're in a relationship, you always should check in. Things you never talked about before. During that check-in, you might discover it. You might discover, we never talked about this. How do you feel about this? And my wife and I were talking one day. We never talked about anything, and I said, so if you die, you want to be cremated? I'm like, no. And it's like, but that's important.
I've had that conversation.
That's important. It's like, but she wants to be cremated. And I'm like, I don't want to be burned. I might feel the heat. But she's like, no. but it's important. But I have to respect our wishes, and she had to respect my wishes. But it's something you have that discussion. It's like a living will. Most people don't have a living will. The reality of the matter is, you could be driving to work one day and you get into a car accident, and you have no living will. Now you leave it up to your spouse now to make certain decisions that he or she may not know how you go about that. Do you want to be intubated? Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to donate your organ? You haven't discussed that, and you have no pathway, no roadmap for that living spouse to guide them, and now they feel guilty, and they're in the hospital. You're asking them what to do, and the family members are there, and there's a conflict between your spouse now and the rest of the family because they're saying, they're making the wrong decision because they think you wanted this, and your spouse does have no clue. So I think having a conversation goes a long way, And I always say to people, I would talk about anything. Nothing I won't talk about. But we're so, as a society, we're so shy to talk about things. We can't touch that topic. There's nothing wrong with conversation. It's just words. It doesn't do anything. If you can converse, you can solve any problem. So now you mentioned something like something happens, start arguing that you don't know what's going on. Well, to resolve the problem, how do you move forward? How do you approach that?
It's setting aside a safe space and time where you have some time away from work, away from kids. You've had some time to think about things and get back to what is our ultimate goal. Where are we deviating from that, and what do we need to get back to our ultimate goal? And really, it needs to be, you need to set aside some safe space and time. And I think it's important. It's a recurring kind of topic in our conversation. You have to have that safe space. You have to know that safe space is there and it's going to be there, and you're going to have that time. If things come up in the meantime that you weren't aware were going to come up, adapt. I have my safe space coming up where I'm going to get some time to speak with my husband, and we can right the track. So I think it's again.
Interesting.
I agree with him.
Yeah, Nick.
I think you hit it right on.
Now, how do you give your partner support during time of conflict? So let's say you are angry with something. Do you consider yourself, Kylie, as someone that will express how you truly feel about something without getting upset, so you can allow a better dialogue? Or do you get emotional that the point doesn't come across?
Depends what the situation is. Sometimes I know I'm gonna get extremely emotional, and that's when I remove myself from the situation until I know I can get my point across and we can have an effective conversation about what just happened. And then other times, if I'm not upset, I can talk about it right then and there.
How do you handle that?
It's hard because sometimes you get emotional, and when emotions come across, which is most of the time when you're upset, it's hard because then you feel like you're not being heard, you feel like you're not being understood, and
I feel like it comes down to emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that there's a time and place to do certain things. If I'm too emotional to have a conversation right now, maybe right now is not the time or place to have this conversation. Is it, do I need a day, 2 days, or 4? Maybe we should consider that avenue. But I think certain things are going to be uncomfortable to talk about, and that there is not enough time in the world for you to just make yourself feel better, put yourself in a better situation to have those kinds of conversations. So sometimes you just need to rip the Band-Aid off. So it's really circumstantial, and just being able to have the emotional intelligence to understand what kind of situation this is.
It's a kind of very interesting point, and I think that I'm going to ask a question, just show of hand, yea or nay. How many of you think it's a good idea when you get into that? Well, let me kind of go back. A lot of women are very emotional. Women tend to be more emotional than us guys. So when you get that conflict situation, do you think it's a good idea to pause, step aside for a little while and then come back? Yea or nay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Like if I'm angry,
That's what I just said.
I need to step aside so I don't say something I don't mean.
Okay.
If it's like an emotional sad, sometimes you want your partner there to comfort you, but then have that conversation of why I'm even crying to begin with. or how we even got to this.
Because that itself can lead to conflict. Because if you are having a conflict with your partner, one might want to just say, I want to talk now. The other might say, I need a break because I need to get away so I don't say or do the wrong thing. So I think that going back and having that discussion again, saying, if under these circumstances, this thing kind of situation happen, this is how we're gonna handle it. I may have some provision in place so that both of you don't have false expectation, because you want things to done certain way, so you're expecting certain things. Your partner wants certain things done, they're expecting a different thing. So that expectation leads to disappointment. But if you have no expectation and you've already had that discussion, it makes life easier. So and I think that's another way to resolve conflict by understanding how you're gonna approach problem solving. You can't imagine every potential situation, but you do have a structure that tells you when there is a problem, we're going to do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna have some kind of.
And that's what one thing you said. You were like, whenever there's no expectation, you can avoid the problem. But I think there will always be an expectation.
I agree.
There will always be some expectation. We can pretend that it's not there.
I think your expectation should be that if there is a problem, we have the process. Not the
Yes,
expectation that I
yes.
expect you to do something, I expect you to react this way. No, those will lead to disappointment.
Yes,
But if you
but
know,
if there's something
yes.
comes up, if
Correct.
we have a plan.
correct,
We have a plan.
correct.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So that expectation for a planned expectation rather than expecting a behavior. I think that thanks for clearing that up. So expecting a behavior, a response, it will lead to disappointment. Expecting a plan in play, a process is more helpful. So, and learning how to actually, I want to give some tips that I think is very important in conflict resolution. We talk about, the reason why I mentioned what will you do when you're emotional about a situation is there is what we call avoiding. So when there's a conflict, if your tendency is to want to walk away and kind of chill, your partner might think you're avoiding them.
That's why we have had many conversations about it.
Correct. And they think you're avoiding them, and it creates more conflict.
Yes.
And so by having that conversation ahead of time, saying, listen, this is how I deal with problem. I'm not trying to ignore you. This is just, I need to process information and come back and I think that takes away that avoiding process that your partner may be thinking is going on. So it's very important to understand, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not withdrawing. I need the space to process it. Most people don't have that conversation, but that's a good tip to really have that ongoing conversation.
And make sure you actually come back and talk about it. Because if I'm constantly saying, I'm emotional, we'll talk later, and we never talk later, we're going to keep having the same fight over and over.
Correct. So that's a good point. So you have to live up to that, what you said. You've got to come back and truly talk about it. All right? Then competing. So yeah, we saw in the last
my
episode
goodness.
we did mention that. Okay, now that I get that response out of you guys, I'll let you take it away. All
What are
right.
we competing about?
Well, you want to address what I mean by competing in conflict resolution? So
I'll address it very carefully.
okay,
As we
You
know, I
always
have to be
add-
very careful. I have to be very careful.
okay.
Um,
Hypothetically speaking,
I'm totally apathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody knows that about me. Competitiveness. I'm very ambitious. My wife is ambitious in her goals. We both have careers that can be breadwinners for the family, so to speak, traditionally. Either one of us could be. How far do we want to go into both of us working as hard as we can, one of us taking more of the part-time role on, one of the caretaker role on? that's like a new, that's something that I have never expected. And I thought it would be a good thing that both of us were in the position to do that. And it's actually one of the most contentious things in our relationship. Right? And this is where you said this is going to be therapeutic for you.
No, but could that be because of expectation that you actually just
We
mentioned?
both had expectations.
Yeah, you both had
right?
expectations.
You're a doctor, and
Correct.
she's like,
Yeah.
what you do.
Correct. You had expectation. Correct. You had expectation without discussing those expectations.
All right.
And when you actually came down to it, it turns out your expectations were not aligning, and that confused us.
Exactly. And it started from the get-go. And it didn't incorporate how does our life change throughout those processes.
Yes.
What with the first kid, with the second kid, with the new house. Every one of those life events, it's impossible to plan for them beforehand. It really is. It takes a professional actually to do that. But you should be thinking about it.
Correct.
And it's very difficult, but if you do it, it's going to be better. If you don't, you need to realize that you didn't, and you need to get on track for those life events, because life events are real.
Correct. So that's a great point. So in an attempt to deal with conflict, there's going to be that competitive aspect of it, like you mentioned. But in addition to what you said, during that conversation, there cannot be a situation where one is dominating that conversation, such that, I think we did have a piece of that in the last episode where, okay, it's my way, kind of deal, not listen to the other person's, because it's gotta be both ways. Because if you go in there with that dominating competitive nature, that the conversation is about my the way I'm looking at it, it's not gonna work. And you raise another point about with the role before you get married, you deciding things. When you do get married, things are gonna change. Like, again, the things change, the relationship things change as you go along, but you're always caught up in the moment in your relationship. You're not thinking about you assume we both want to have a house. You assume we're gonna have kids, but you never discuss. Do you want a 2-story house? You want a small house? You want to live in a condo? How many kids you want to have? None of that comes across during the relationship most of the time. And when things start to happen, and then you start going, oh snap, what do I do? And then another snap before you know it, and then it just becomes overwhelming. And so if you already have a competitive attitude about things, it just makes it more difficult because it becomes a battle. So, and then that band that gets pulled back and forth. So it comes to time where it's a time out. And then, okay, we already know what we know. What could happen in the future? We can't undo this. Well, can we prepare for the future? And again, it takes two to do that. Okay? And that's when collaboration comes into place. You have to make an attempt to collaborate. It's not easy to collaborate. You guys see this at work. You see with your friendship, right? How is it easy to collaborate with your friends or co-workers sometimes?
Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. Depends on the situation.
Because the other person has to want to collaborate. Collaboration takes two. If you want to collaborate with somebody, they don't want to collaborate, it doesn't work. And so that's why it's important to learn that collaboration is really important to so many tips. And then you also have to accommodate. How do you accommodate your partner during conflict?
That's a great question. I do my best to listen and just really put myself in her shoes, to be completely frank. A lot of the times, just breaking down the situation for what it really is, we're two very different people. She's very earthy, she's into nature, I'm more into the city. I'm not a big fan of the suburbs. I like being in the high action, high energy area. She's more, let me have my house, let me get my garden, I'll be happy. That's gonna be very difficult in the city. So we haven't really gotten to that point as to what's that happy in between. Given that we're both so young, I'm more, I'm into my career. She's about to graduate. I'm like, well, I'm already in my career. We should probably go wherever I'm going because that's the more secure route. But she has a life, she has a passion, she has dreams too, and I should also be very considerate of those as well, just as she should me. So it just comes down to being considerate, and really understanding one another despite your differences.
And yeah, go ahead.
I just try to give us. It goes back to empathy, and I try to do those small acts of service that I think will take a little bit of pressure off of her. So I'll cook for the night. It's hard because I still have to do what I do, but right now my partner needs a little bit more, and she knows how much and if she sees that I'm giving that little bit more to try to make things okay during this time of conflict, it will help the conflict.
Absolutely. And both of you nailed it. Ladies, what do you guys think?
What was the question again?
Well, in terms of accommodating, during conflict, how do you accommodate your partner or yourself during conflict?
I think what they said really brought it home. A lot of it is listening and actively listening, and then coming up with like a strategy of, okay, I heard you. This is what I'm willing to do. Is that okay for you? Or do you need more from me? Like, it's just all communication, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like listening.
Having communicated
Empathy.
before, knowing your partner, knowing what they might like, knowing how to take a little toll off of them,
Yeah,
a
and
little
like
load off of them.
you said, doing little like acts of service, knowing their love language. Something small from their love language could change their entire day.
You know what it sounds like? Compromising.
That too.
So you listen, you understand where they're coming from, and you're compromising by putting what you're supposed to do aside and doing things for them, and saying, hey, is that okay with you? I think that's what it comes down to. Listening to each other, show empathy, and show a little bit of, some kind of act of service to them. Like, I really care. Really mean a lot to me. And they do the same to you. And I think that goes a long way. So there are other tips I'm going to add to what we talked about. And, I think we mentioned that before also. During that conversation, avoid saying, you did this, you did this, you did this. Because the moment you say you, there comes a wall. They becomes angry. And even if they're at fault, you also are at fault to some degree. So rather than saying you, say, well, what can I do differently? What did I do? I address you. And I think if you're arguing with somebody, you ever try this, try this social experiment in your life with someone you're having an argument with. You cannot argue by yourself. You need another person to argue with. When someone is jumping up and down and you go, oh, what can I do for you? Is there anything I could offer you to make you feel better? That individual, after a while, will start going, what am I doing? I'm looking rather
Because
stupid.
we can only get so mad.
Correct. And then they will stop. So you can, so saying I rather than you really breaks that tug of war, so to speak, and relieve the stress. Be respectful and kind. Sometimes it's hard when you're angry, but still try to be respectful and kind to each other. It goes a long way. Learn to understand, not to respond. That's huge. You want to respond.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? Why?
That's us.
Why?
But why?
Yeah.
That's us. That's a woman thing.
Yeah,
Like,
but it's
we
a
need to
man
know
thing as
why
well.
all
Yes.
the time.
We're like, why? Which is funny because
Yeah.
we're both
Exactly.
asking each other,
Yeah.
The same question.
why would you do that? Why would you make me feel that way? And I'm like, why would you? Don't you?
Just why?
Why? Everything's good here. What's wrong? Why is why is there a problem?
Yeah.
Right? So
And learn to agree to disagree. Avoid blaming. You know, again, when you blame the other person, then you're taking no responsibility. You're taking zero responsibility. So for you to take 1% responsibility, you can't blame that person. You can't say, you use a different terminology.
that's good.
You know, it's very important. And be future focused in your problem solving. A lot of times, there's a conflict now. Well, last week you did this. Oh, 2 weeks we did that. 3 weeks we did that. But that's not really moving forward. You're going backwards. You know, if you want to solve a problem, you gotta move forward. So you gotta be future focused.
But we don't forget.
I know, but we have to work on it.
That's a very good point. No,
You know,
it's
you
good.
can't undo the past. You know, right before, during the intermission, we had a glass of Prosecco. I mean, that's gone. We can't take that back.
But
We
we
can't
can
undo
get.
that.
But we can get a new
We
one.
can have more.
But we can't undo it.
We can't.
You cannot undo it.
And
It's
one
gone.
of one of my responses was unfocused because of that. It was totally
And-
gobbledygook.
And above all, create solidarity and empathy.
Very good.
All right?
Mhm.
Now, before we end this conversation, I want to demonstrate something that I want to leave you guys with. So, you audience at home, I want you to take a good look at this demonstration and think about this every day when you're in a conflict. Actually, think about this when you're not in conflict. It's going to be very helpful and it's going to make your life a very happy one. All right, so here's a little demonstration we're going to have about conflict. So I'm going to need your assistance.
Okay, absolutely.
All right, so if you're in a relationship, whether a friendship, romantic, no matter what the relationship may be, if you're angry at your partner, right? Assume this is you're angry. This is your anger level. Can you pick that up? That's how angry you are. Okay? If you don't let go, it builds up to unforgetfulness. You put that down. Now you keep the anger in you. Now you can pick that up. Now because you won't let go,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting heavier. And put it down. Now all of a sudden you don't let go, you become resentful. So it can get heavier. And if you don't let go,
Heavier.
then you have bitterness. Now, your level of anger now is down to bitterness. Yes. Now, think about this. This is very simple. Can you pick up your anger again? It can lift that up. That's the amount of anger in him. But you also can put it down. If he puts it down, he doesn't have to deal with this or that. You have to let go your anger. You have to let things go. You can't hold on to it. When you hold on to it, it builds up to a bigger problem. So that's the simple demonstration to show you that when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're stressed out, you gotta learn to let it go. You're carrying that weight. You have the option to let it go. If you don't let it go, it's just gonna build up to a bigger problem. Thank you everyone for watching. Until next time.